Hello guys, welcome back to this Mercedes Sprinter van conversion. We've had an exciting couple of weeks. 2 weeks ago we had the delivery of the boiler and all of the boiler controls, and last week we had all the furniture board turn up. We've gone with this high gloss Zebrano lightweight furniture board which we've purchased from Moorland. We've also gone with a vinyl covered ply for the headliner. But before we can get into fixing this headliner onto the ceiling of our van, there's a few little things that we need to just tidy up. We've got to make sure that we've got all the battens in place, we've got to make sure that our vapour barrier's in and all of the electrics are pulled in and all the socket boxes are installed. So there's a few bits and pieces that I just want to wrap up in this last little video before we start getting into ply lining the van and then building the furniture. I'll set the fence up so it's about 2 1/8 of an inch away from the blade, and we're going to run some strips of 12mm ply which we're then going to screw to the ribs running across the roof of the van. That's going to give us something to then fix the headlining to. These timber battens will now be fixed to the ribs of the roof, and then that will give us something to secure the headlining to. That's all the roof battens cut to length. I'm just going to use some self-tapping screws to screw them to the roof of the van. I've marked on this board where I want the screws to go. I'm going to transfer these marks to the rest of the boards, and then I'm going to drill and countersink some holes ready for the screws. These are the screws I'm going to be using to hold the roof battens up. You've seen me use these before. They're a self-drilling screw. Each of these screws has got a drill point. So what it will do is it will drill its own pilot hole in the metal of the van and then self-tap its way in. I've got a drill bit with a countersink set up in the battery drill. Just going to knock out these pilot holes. That'll give me a nice countersink to hide that screw head. To assist us when we're in the van, we're just going to put these screws in until the point of the screw is just flush with the other side. Just enough to hold it. It's not coming through. I can just barely see the tip there poking through, but then that'll hold that. When we're in the van, we can just drive them home. Just makes things a little bit easier when you're working on your own. That's all the roof battens pre-drilled, screws all ready to go in. Now just to fix them to the roof. What I've noticed on the ribs of the roof of the van is that there's a little step here and then it goes down at a slight angle. So I've cut these battens back so that they'll just finish just before that step, and hopefully the majority of that slope will be covered in the headliner. And it won't mean that the edge won't come down at an angle. Hopefully that edge will remain fairly flat and I can conceal that ramp within the ceiling and not have to cut round it. I'm going to use some of this Sikaflex 512, which is an adhesive and a sealant. I'm going to run a bead of this down the back of the batten and then screw it up to the roof of the van. What that'll do is when that goes off, that will help by sticking to the roof of the van, but it will also prevent these battens from rattling. When we're driving along, the last thing you want is for these battens to be vibrating and causing a noise. nice and solid. That'll give us something really nice and smooth to run our headliner through. Now before we wrap this ceiling with the foil face bubble wrap, I just want to tape over these stick pins with foil, like this one here, just to complete that vapour barrier. Just want to make sure that they're all sealed. We also want to make sure that all of the joints between the insulation are sealed. Where we've cut a recess for any light fittings, we've foil taped around those as well. And then I'll also foil tape all the way along these battens from one side of the insulation to the other. So essentially I'm going to make a complete foil barrier across the whole of this ceiling. Then I'm going to wrap it again with foil face bubble wrap. So there's absolutely no way that any moisture is going to get through there. I'm going to have about 3 layers of foil covering the whole of this roof. This plywood strip will act as a thermal break between the headliner and these metal ribs. Wood is also a very good insulator. And then the vinyl covered ply headliner will get fixed to these timber battens. But I'm only fixing into the timber battens. I'm not fixing right the way through into the steel rib. So there's definitely going to be a break between the fixings that are into the steel in the wood and the fixings that are in the headliner into the ply. So there's going to be no permanent contact from one side to the other. Any fixings that you put through this vapour barrier, I've had quite a few people say, aren't you piercing it and breaking it? Well, no, I'm not, because the screw is actually plugging the hole that it's making, and very tightly. There's absolutely no way that any moisture laden air is going to get through a screw penetration. I've got 50mm of Kingspan in the walls. I've recessed all the socket boxes for the kitchen into the Kingspan, foil taped everything ready to be vapour barriered over, and then ply lining over the top of that. The first fix part of any project does take a lot of planning. You've got to know well in advance what equipment you're going to put in the vehicle, exactly where it's going to go, and where you want to run all the cables and services. So you really do need to sit down at an early stage and decide how you're going to plan your vehicle out so that you can make sure that you get all of these services in the right place first time. In an ideal world, you don't want to forget anything, because once you've lined everything, you don't want to have to remove that, and running cables on the surface when you've gone to all the trouble to conceal all the rest just doesn't make sense. So now we've got all of our services, all of our control cables and all of our power cables tucked away. We've got the whole van insulated and lined. Now we can start the fun part, building all the cabinetry. In the next part of this series, we're looking at doing the furniture build, and we're looking at installing all the appliances. So please make sure that you're subscribed. Do hit the little bell symbol. You'll get a notification as soon as I upload the next video. And please do share my videos on social media. That really gives me a lot of support. Thanks very much for watching. Cheers.